The Sudanese Civil War stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unresolved conflict. For decades, Sudan, a nation of immense diversity and potential, has been ravaged by a complex and brutal civil war. This conflict, rooted in deep-seated political, economic, and social divisions, has left an indelible mark on the country and its people. The seeds of discord were sown long before the first shots were fired, with simmering tensions between the Arab-dominated North and the African South. These tensions, fueled by political marginalization, economic inequality, and social injustice, eventually erupted into open warfare. From the first shots fired in 1955 to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement of 2005, Sudan has witnessed cycles of violence, ceasefires, and renewed fighting. This essay delves into the heart of the Sudanese Civil War, exploring its historical antecedents, key events, and devastating consequences. Ultimately, this essay seeks to provide a nuanced understanding of one of Africa's longest and most tragic conflicts. The Sudanese Civil War is not a spontaneous eruption of violence, but rather the culmination of decades of deep-seated grievances and systemic inequalities. At the heart of this conflict lies a fundamental struggle for power, resources, and identity. British colonial rule, while relatively short, played a significant role in exacerbating existing divisions within Sudanese society. The British adopted a policy of divide and rule, favoring the Arab-Muslim North over the African South. The North, with its closer ties to the colonial administration, benefited disproportionately from development initiatives, education, and access to political power. The South, on the other hand, was largely neglected, its people relegated to the margins of society. This disparity in development created a stark economic divide between the North and South. The North, with its more developed infrastructure and access to resources, became the center of economic activity. The South, meanwhile, remained largely impoverished. Its people denied the same opportunities for advancement. By the time Sudan gained independence in 1956, the stage was set for a protracted and bloody conflict. The First Sudanese Civil War, erupting in 1955, just a year before the nation's independence, marked the violent manifestation of Sudan's deep-seated divisions. The war was ignited by a mutiny of southern soldiers in the town of Torit, who rebelled against their northern commanders. The Anya, a southern rebel group, emerged as the primary force fighting for the liberation of the South from what they perceived as northern oppression. The First Civil War was characterized by brutal guerrilla warfare, with both sides committing atrocities against civilians. The northern government, dominated by Arab elites, responded to the southern rebellion with overwhelming military force. Villages were razed, civilians were massacred, and a campaign of terror was unleashed upon the South. The Anya, lacking the firepower of the North, resorted to guerrilla tactics, ambushing convoys and attacking government installations. Millions were displaced from their homes, fleeing to neighboring countries or seeking refuge in remote areas. Despite the brutality of the conflict, the First Civil War also witnessed moments of remarkable resilience and courage. After 17 years of brutal conflict, the Addis Ababa Agreement of 1972 offered a glimmer of hope to war-torn Sudan. The agreement, brokered by Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, aimed to bring an end to the bloodshed and address the root causes of the conflict. The Addis Ababa Agreement granted the South a significant degree of autonomy. A regional government was established in the South, with its own legislature and executive council. The agreement also recognized the South's right to cultural and religious freedom, a key demand of the Southern rebels. However, the agreement was flawed from the outset. It failed to address fundamental issues such as the distribution of oil wealth, which had been discovered in the South in the 1970s. Moreover, the Addis Ababa Agreement was poorly implemented. The North, suspicious of Southern intentions, dragged its feet in granting the South the autonomy it had been promised. The fragile peace established by the Addis Ababa Agreement unraveled in 1983, plunging Sudan into a second, even more devastating civil war. The reignition of the conflict was sparked by a complex interplay of factors, including the North's failure to fully implement the Addis Ababa Agreement, the discovery of oil in the south, and the rise of political Islam in Khartoum. In 1983, President Ghaffar Nimeri, under pressure from Islamist groups, declared Sudan an Islamic state and imposed Sharia law throughout the country. This move alienated the predominantly Christian and animist South, who saw it as a betrayal of the Addis Ababa Agreement and an attempt to impose Northern Arab Muslim identity on the entire country. The Sudan People's Liberation Army, led by John Garang, emerged as the main southern rebel group. The SPLA fought for the creation of a secular, united Sudan where all citizens were treated equally, regardless of their ethnicity or religion. The Second Sudanese Civil War was even more brutal than the first. Both sides committed widespread human rights abuses, including massacres, torture, and the use of child soldiers. The Sudanese Civil War has left an indelible scar on the country and its people. The human cost of this conflict is immeasurable, with millions dead, injured, or displaced. The war has created a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions, leaving behind a legacy of trauma, poverty, and despair. The exact number of casualties in the Sudanese Civil War is unknown, but estimates range from 2 to 3 million people. The vast majority of these casualties were civilians, caught in the crossfire or deliberately targeted by both sides of the conflict. The war has displaced millions more, forcing them to flee their homes in search of safety. The conflict has had a devastating impact on Sudan's infrastructure. Roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals have been destroyed or damaged, crippling the country's already fragile economy. The humanitarian crisis in Sudan is compounded by the government's restrictions on access for aid organizations. The international community's response to the Sudanese Civil War has been marked by a mix of humanitarian aid, diplomatic efforts, and limited military intervention. While the world has not stood idly by as Sudan has burned, its response has often been slow, inadequate, and hampered by competing interests. The United Nations and other international organizations have played a vital role in providing humanitarian assistance to those affected by the conflict. Millions of Sudanese have been kept alive by food aid, medical supplies, and other forms of assistance provided by these organizations. The international community has also invested heavily in diplomatic efforts to bring an end to the conflict. Numerous peace talks have been held over the years, mediated by regional organizations, neighboring countries, and international actors. While these talks have yielded some progress, they have yet to result in a lasting peace agreement. The international community has been more reluctant to intervene militarily in the Sudanese Civil War. The Sudanese Civil War, despite the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2005 and the subsequent secession of South Sudan in 2011, has left an enduring legacy of trauma, division, and underdevelopment. The road to lasting peace and reconciliation in Sudan is long and arduous, demanding a comprehensive approach that addresses not only the symptoms but also the root causes of the conflict. The first step towards healing the wounds of war is to address the immediate humanitarian crisis. Millions of Sudanese remain displaced, both internally and as refugees in neighboring countries. Reconstructing Sudan's shattered infrastructure is another daunting challenge. The war has destroyed roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, and other vital infrastructure, hindering economic development and service delivery. Rebuilding these essential services is crucial for creating a conducive environment for peace and stability. Addressing the root causes of the conflict is essential for preventing its recurrence. This requires tackling issues such as political marginalization, economic inequality, and social injustice. The Sudanese Civil War stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the enduring legacy of violence. While the guns have largely fallen silent, the road to lasting peace and reconciliation in Sudan remains long and challenging. The international community has a moral obligation to support Sudan in its efforts to build a more peaceful and prosperous future. This includes providing continued humanitarian assistance, supporting reconstruction and development initiatives, and promoting dialogue and reconciliation. Only through a concerted and sustained effort can we hope to break the cycle of violence and build a brighter future for all Sudanese.